So good to see you again. Welcome back for another video, back to my channel. Today we're going to be doing a new video, and we're going to be studying something pretty interesting. We're going to study the migration of early humanity throughout the whole Earth, and see how we came from one place and spread throughout this planet. It's truly fascinating, and I'm very excited to talk about it. So we're going to focus on DNA and talk about that for a little bit. And then I think we're gonna maybe talk a little bit about haplogroups, and we're going to look at a map of the entire world and show the migration using arrows and a timeline of when people came from where. So let's actually set the mood a little bit, and we will go brew some iced coffee and light a candle, and maybe even turn on our essential oils so that we can zoom in on this map and really explore the history of how we came to be here. So, without further ado, let's go make that coffee and get everything ready. And then we'll take a look at the map as well. Human migration is the movement of people one place to another. And today we're focusing on historical and early human migrations for Homo sapiens. So since the Paleolithic and Neolithic, these migrations were all over the place here. And usually later on that many of these other places were colonized as well. So today we're talking about early human migration. And the story of humanity begins about 1.75 million years ago in Africa. And Homo sapien appears to have occupied all of Africa about 150,000 years ago. Some of the people moved out of Africa 70,000 years ago. And according to some studies, 125,000 years going towards Asia. So there are some big periods of migration, but by 40,000 BC, Europe and Australia and Asia had taken place. The Americas, over in that section there, had not been found until 20,000 years, 15,000 years ago. By 2,000 years ago, humans had settled these Pacific islands. So many of these migrations caused substantial cultural changes, such as in Turkey or Azerbaijan. So there are obviously positives and negatives of conquest, and in many cases, the populations and demographics shifted dramatically due to these conquests, such as Rome or the Mongols. Many of the reasons for migration was due to climate, landscape, and inadequate food supply. For example, the people in the South China mainland went to Taiwan about 8,000 years ago for similar reasons. So there are many historical events we can turn to, such as the Greeks, to understand particular regions. But now we're gonna take a step further to understand these movements and talk about DNA. So just briefly, DNA is something we have that is unique. And within DNA is something called a haplogroup, which is a genetic population group of people who share a common ancestor on either the mother or the father's side. So these haplogroups are assigned letters of the alphabet, A, B, C, D, E, etc. If your father was born in Tanzania, for example, you might have a particular haplogroup that you would carry with you because of whatever demographical reasons, but essentially these are things you carry with you forever. So, modern migration patterns have altered the global distribution of these groups, but for the most part, you can read and understand that identity. So, using your mother or your father, using different methods, you can make different determinations. So, we're going to take a step back and we're going to draw on this map here to draw the path of expansion of human beings or Homo sapiens and when. So let's go ahead and we're going to keep a big view here of the map so that we can see everything. But we're just going to do step by step. And of course, I'm not an expert, I'm just a history buff. But I have a lot to learn. I defer to any. I'm sure there may be some corrections, and in this particular field, it is constantly changing. The knowledge that we have, just based on genetic research, and the pace of change is quite large, so this information could be outdated in a year or two. It's possible, but for the most part, some of this seems to be scientific consensus. So let's take a look, zoom in here. So the beginning is here in Africa, which is about 200,000 years ago. And in this part, humans are traveling. They spread from East Central Africa to Southern Africa. And in this area, their relatives included the Pygmies and the Khoisan people. It could be Khoisan, but they lived in the harsher lands here, Southern Africa, about 200,000 years ago. So that's haplogroups L0, E, and A. So we're going to go and move across Africa here. Sort of along this area, up into Europe. So we're going to draw the arrows here. So there was migration back and forth in this area here. And this was essentially the haplogroups L3, E, and B. This migration was when the landscapes became a bit more hospitable. They settled from the central West African coast to North Africa. And this is the lineage of the Berber people. So they were traditionally livestock herders and traditionally farming groups. And additionally, they moved further west here, so. Go ahead and draw that. And we can see here that this is the descendants of the Bantu people. And they had advanced farming culture, and they were the first people in sub-Saharan Africa to work iron. So the Bantu language spread actually throughout the continent, actually. So similarly, it's L, B, and E as the haplogroups here. So this was actually this group eventually dominated a lot of the culture. Now we're going to continue this. I mean, actually, an interesting fact is the Bantu language in Africa they were able to use the iron tools and weapons. So they had a big advantage, and that's kind of the reason for the expansion. So now we're going to continue, and after Africa, we migrated further north. And this was towards the Fertile Crescent. So humans went out of Africa to the fertile areas of the Middle East, which had different environments back then. And these were nomads. And they eventually became some of the earliest farmers. So this was the growth of agriculture, art, textiles, religion, and other hallmarks of human civilization. So that's very important. So that was actually about 100,000 years ago. So at this point we continue onward into the Middle East and into Asia. Well, this area here was about 70,000 years ago. But another expansion actually took place here from Africa. And that came actually this way here. Continued actually was more along the coast there. So this was the establishment of life in Australia, which is quite interesting because it actually happened 50,000 years ago. So, and that group is E M N Q C D C T. And they founded the original Aboriginal population in Australia. So now we follow this path here because it kind of just makes sense here naturally, but a group of people went along the coast of Asia, and after they left Africa, they settled on the coast of East Asia and the islands of Japan. And so essentially they're going through Vietnam and Thailand and some of these areas here up through Japan. And actually, one of those lines continues over the land bridge to the Americas. So, this here in Indonesia is about 30,000 years ago. Now, just to continue this line, we have Australia. We have another line here. This is New Zealand. So actually, just to finish off this region, this was relatively recent. And we can see here, this actually was only about 1,500 years ago. So, something kind of interesting there. We also need to add some haplogroups here. So we have GMODC. So now we're actually going to take a turn here, because from Japan there's actually a group that sort of goes back into China. So now this area in here was founded, or really settled about this area was settled about 25,000 years ago. Actually, maybe that could be a little bit further north, more towards Russia, but anyways. So now we're going to take a look at another area here. And that is about Europe, beginning at least the northern part of Africa. It's about 40,000 years ago. Actually, from the migration towards the Fertile Crescent, we get some people going back into northern Africa. Now, some of the interesting things are that there's migrations back and forth, and I think Africa is repopulated twice. I think there's a migration out of it and back into it. It's a period of time. So, from the Fertile Crescent, the group of, which makes up the Berber livestock herder population, sort of the Atlas Mountains. So they head along sort of Greece and Europe, so we're going to draw that. So there was actually some exchange there with Greece, so I drew a little extra line there. So that sort of was the beginning of another migration, which we'll talk about shortly. So, essentially, the beginning folk went from Fertile Crescent into Europe, so they created a shift from a nomadic lifestyle to a settled one. So that actually goes up into northern Europe there. So, that's sort of the order of things there. So the haplogroups are H, J, K, N, T, W, G, J, and E. So now these folks move north to further into Europe here. So let's go ahead and draw another line. So that's sort of the way that it's split out right there. So the haplogroups in this area here in Europe are actually similar because they obviously connect here. So let's take a look at those. So this is sort of the European sort of direction here. So now we're going to go ahead and continue. And they're continuing along the grasslands here. Kazakstan and the open grass savanna. There's a lot of early modern humans here, Neanderthals and Denisovans. And so we can actually see a divergence here into Russia and India. So some of these populations went south into southern India. So these groups here are WXG. I'm going to enter J there twice for some reason. So these were the nomadic folks. Now the people continuing onward to Asia. We have people in Pakistan and Nepal, and they practice agriculture and forest resource gathering. So this is the present and the Romani people, a linguistic tradition that has been traced back to India, actually. So there's this line needs to probably be a little bit further south here, but essentially these are different times. This is 50,000 years ago, and this is 70, so this is happening sort of simultaneously. So the groups here are A M R5 R6 R7 W L R and H. So now we're gonna go back north, which is actually the other population of Europe. So we're gonna move up north a little bit and curve around here. So now the people moved into Central Asia, and they hunted megafauna such as woolly mammoths in the open steppe. So it was a seasonal big prey kind of lifestyle. The big game didn't become extinct later, and so the descendants of these early inhabitants still sort of live in nomadic herders in the same lands. So these people moved into Central Asia through Europe and back into Europe. And as you know, in this general area here, there's Neanderthals and Denisovans, as I mentioned before. So they ran into those people, and you can find that DNA still present in the people of that region today. So this kind of goes through more France and Spain and England as well. So let's take a look at that. So you can see there's multiple migrations, and as I understand it, that these migrations did travel back south, so into Africa. So now we're going to continue across Asia, which includes a line like this into the rest of China, so Inner Mongolia here and southern China as well, Chengdu in that area. And that haplogroup is as follows. A, B, C, D, C, and Q. Interestingly, this group here splits off again around in China. And this is actually how the Sweden, Norway, Finland, and this group also continues north into Russia and into this area here. So we're going to draw a big line. So there's another migration there. So this is the haplogroups Z, Q, and N. And these initial migrations went through southern China and moved through northwest Asia into Scandinavia. And they were following the herds of reindeer into their new homeland. So, very interesting. So, this area here, this is continuing into Indonesia, and there was another migration here north from that original Aborigine migration, so it sort of follows along here. So that is the haplogroups B, 4, N, O, P, R, S, Y, M, and O. So these are among the first people to develop rice agriculture in Southeast and Southern Asia. Some of them went into Japan and others went into Polynesia. The great migrations there, so so now we have more migration here. So we have two more little pieces of migration here. And this is a migration that occurred with the haplogroups A, B, 2, X, and Q. And this is the inland migration from Asia to the Americas. So this migration went across Asia and across the Bering Strait. So we'll come back to it, but we'll just draw the line to, you can imagine on the other side. And also in this haplogroup F here. And haplogroup F moved from this group here into China. So you can see that there's a lot of multiple migrations into the Chinese area of China. From the north and Japan, and from the Middle East and the steppe region here. Interestingly, another migration occurred in the Americas, and interestingly, it was the same group here from Japan, continuing north along these islands towards the Bering Strait. So one of the areas we forgot is some of them would turn back towards India, and some of them went into southern China. So this is B5, B6, N, O, and O. So we're going to go to the Americas, but before we do that, we're going to fill in a few more pieces of the puzzle here. So one of the other areas here is Madagascar. And we think it comes from this area here. And that happened about 1,500 years ago. Similarly to New Zealand. Now let's go into the Americas and we can finish our map. So you can sort of see the map here. Through Africa into the Fertile Crescent. And through the Middle East and the steppes into China and Asia, Australia. Then up through Southeast Asia to Japan. Back through North Africa into Europe and into the steppe, and then into the Americas as well. So now we're going to come over to the Bering Strait, And this is mainly a coastal expansion, although there has been some evidence of seafaring here in South America, so it's not totally settled, but as far as we know, the direction that people took was about 15,000 years ago. So it's about 15,000 years. And as they continue down the coast, it was about another 3,000 years as they move downward. So it's, in the United States, it's about 12,000 years. And that's the Native Americans and the descendants of Latin people as well. So, also worth mentioning is the expansion into Canada and up into Newfoundland, where there was some discoveries of more ancient settlements. So that's actually about 4,500 years ago. And then essentially the migration continues around that time period into South America all the way down. So the way the migration patterns occurred in South America was sort of 3 different paths, but essentially it's all along the coast. So as well as a split off in the inland here, and also to the north in Brazil and these areas here. So this is pretty much it, and this is it. Well, it's a bit more complicated than that, but I hope this helped you visualize sort of the amazing path that humans have taken to get to where they are today. You can see the path of humanity here through Africa and up all the red arrows across the steppe, and then over here into the States. As you can see, that was really fascinating, and it's amazing all of the stories of the amazing people that led all of us here today. And we can see on this map how long it took to go from one place on this planet to all throughout the world. And it makes me sit and wonder thinking about it. So that said, let's get some sleep. And I hope you have a really lovely evening. And I'll see you back for the next video.